The Six-Day War lasted from June 5th to June 10th, 1967. The main belligerents of this conflict were Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, all of which fought against Israel. Quick side note, Saudi Arabia and Lebanon also had small roles in the war, however they will not be addressed in this video. Anyways, looking at the conflict on paper, it seems obvious which side will win the war. In fact, how about you take a guess right now? Got your answer? Okay, here we go. With an overwhelming victory, the winner was Israel. How'd that happen? Well, that's why we're here. When looking at this conflict, two main questions arise. Why did Israel and these Arab countries go to war in the first place? And how exactly did Israel manage to win with the odds seemingly stacked against them? Let's start with a little background. In 1948, when Israel declared its independence, the surrounding Arab countries weren't pleased for multiple reasons. One of them being is that when Israel was founded, the Palestinians that were living there were forced out so that Israeli settlers could have a place to live.
God damn, Jimmy. This some serious gourmet shit.
Less than a year after Israel's independence, the surrounding Arab countries declared war, which is now referred to as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which ended in an Israeli victory. The next conflict that built up towards the Six-Day War was the Suez Crisis. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. In October of that same year, Israel, the United Kingdom, and France attacked Egypt in order to regain control of the Suez. The UK and France felt that Egypt's actions could harm their economic and military interests in the region, and Egypt had also blocked Israeli vessels from entering the canal. This conflict resulted in a victory for the Israeli side, further growing resentment towards Israel from its neighbors in the region. Now we fast forward to 1967. Egypt closed the canal to Israeli vessels once again, despite Israel warning that such an action would be considered justification for war. And just as the Israelis had warned, war broke out on June 5th, 1967. So, how did the Israelis win a conflict in which they were so heavily outnumbered? The answer was air superiority. During that time, air warfare had advanced in strides, meaning that having control of the skies gave your ground forces a huge advantage. However, on June 4th, 1967, Arab forces had roughly 3 times the number of aircraft that Israel did. So, what did Israel do to counter this huge disadvantage? They blew up the Egyptian army's aircraft before they even got the chance to get off the ground. With air superiority combined with superior military planning and strategy, the Israelis were able to make massive land gains on the Sinai Peninsula and take control of the Suez, all within the span of 6 days. After the dust had settled, Israel had control of the Sinai Peninsula and would occupy it for the next 15 years. To the Arab world, this event would be known as the Great Setback. Such a humiliating defeat would not be soon forgotten. There would be another war in 1973 between Israel, Egypt, and Syria, which would end in another Israeli victory. That war, known as the Yom Kippur War, would be the last major conflict between Israel and Arab countries during the 20th century.